Professor Hisatake Kato, thank you very much for joining our program today. The Iraqi issue is in a critical phase at present, where there is no telling when the United States will take military action. Professor Kato, you've been insisting that the use of force, especially a preemptive strike, violates the United Nations Charter, even if a concerned resolution is approved at the Security Council. Would you please tell us the major reasons for your point?
The Charter of the United Nations says that all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means. It does not allow members to turn a military solution even if they are not successful in settling the dispute in a peaceful manner in the first instance. It also means that preemptive strikes are not allowed under any circumstance in the name of the United Nations. Any ultimatum aiming to start a war, regardless of the length of the forbearance, is invalid under UN Security Council resolution. The same article says that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. If we apply the principle to current Iraqi issue, we can say that Iraq violated the UN Charter when she invaded Kuwait and tried to annex the territory. But if the United States overrides the independence of Iraq by force, it is also a violation of the UN Charter. Iraq might be a despotic state, and independence of the current Iraqi state might cause suffering to the Iraqi people. Even so, UN Charter prohibits overthrowing the government of an independent state.
Concerning the current Iraqi issue, the Bush administration insists that the world must protect the international community as well as the United States from the threat of terror and that of the weapons of mass destruction which may escalate the threat of terror. In other words, the United States is in a position to regard a war against Iraq as being part of the world defense effort. Professor Kato, what would you like to say on the U.S. point?
I think that the U.S. point has two aspects. One, the necessity principle of self-defense, that is, self-defense is lawful only when attacks are imminent and there is no time for resorting to other means to preventing them. This principle is irrelevant to terrorism. That preemptive attacks should be allowed against terrorism. Two, in the age of the Cold War, the balance of power had to be taken into account. In the world of the post-Cold War, given the fundamental change of conditions, the self-defense of the U.S. takes precedence over the decisions of the UN Security Council. My points are that the principle of international law should be applied to all countries equally. If so, this will follow from the U.S. position. 1. Any country has a right of preemptive attack and overthrowing the hostile government insofar as it suspects the other countries harboring terrorists who are planning an attack against the country. 2. If a rule that unilateral military action can be taken unless checked by counter-military forces, regardless of UN resolutions, become an international principle, then only the existing superpower, the United States, is strong enough to utilize military forces freely. Therefore, if this rule should be approved as an international principle, only the United States would be able to attack and destroy a hostile country solely based on her own suspicion.
In a way, the 20th century was a century of wars, but it was also a century that people continued to struggle to prevent wars, to establish peace, and to build a world structure that would effectively help settle various problems without resorting to war. Professor Kato, if the United States should go to war against Iraq without getting approval from the international community, do you think we will have failed to learn from history?
In the 21st century, any military action should be placed on the track of achieving eternal peace. In feudal Japan, there was a principle that in a quarrel, both parties are to blame. It is called Kenka Ryoseibai in Japanese language. It is a principle that in the case of military conflict, both parties are punished for neglecting their duty to find a peaceful solution. I think that to apply this time-honored rule to international conflict is the first step toward eternal peace. The United States should not take sides in the case of international military conflict. The United States is strong enough to intervene in the conflict and stop the military actions of both sides. All the other countries, including Japan, should support such military actions by the United States. At the same time, the United States should make the demilitarization of herself as her own goal. Recent moves by Washington make me suspect that the Bush administration is taking advantage of the post-Cold War situation to monopolize the control of the world.
Your latest book, Peace Ethics, or Senso Rinrigaku in Japanese, said that the world has been landsliding towards war since the September 11th terrorism. In such a situation, people are likely to get used to the tragic reality caused by wars and lose their senses. In fact, these words are mentioned in the opening of your book. I hear that you published the book quite urgently. What prompted you to write this book of peace ethics in spite of being very busy?
As an individual, Japanese people's mentality is feeble and they start running in the direction of war once other people around them start running towards the inevitable war against terrorism. I am hoping that people who have the outlook, philosophy, ethics, that preemptive attacks should not be allowed under any circumstances shall be in the driver's seat of Japan. The world shall start walking toward pacifism. In the not-so-distant future, if people who believe in pacifism do not abandon their sense of ethics and keep their aspiration alive, even in the possible event of pacifism defeat this time, it is not at all the death of pacifism. In order to save the ecosystem of the earth, we need peace. War is the most anachronistic thing in this century.
You wrote in your book, war or the use of force is strictly limited by international rules. A law of retaliation goes against the United Nations Charter. We must pause a little while to think about war calmly and to look for a possible way of preventing war. Finally, Professor Kato, what does each person have to take to heart? And what do we have to do today for the world? And what can Japan or must Japan do concerning the present Iraqi problem? Please give us your frank suggestions.
We are seeing a moment of a mad and wild dream, a dream to control the world by military force. George W. Bush managed to dream this dream as history turned down from the Cold War. Soon the American people will realize that war is an anachronism and war is a very unreasonable means to settling things that incurs more cost and produces less profit. In the nature of things, warring parties should make compensations for the cost of civilian casualties and refugees in the action. In the case that the Japanese ship, the Ehime, was sunk by U.S. submarine by mistake, the U.S. government made enough compensation. Likewise, all the casualties and the people who have lost their homes because of war have a right to have full compensation. I believe that the high-handed military actions by the Bush administration shall bring another chance for pacifism.
Thank you very much, Professor Kato.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak to people in the other part of the globe on this pressing problem today.
That was Professor Hisatake Kato, the president of Tottori University of Environmental Studies, interviewed by Dai Nishi.